Hello and welcome to another update. In this one, I'll be covering the latest developments throughout the front line, starting out with the developments around the Robotyne area, where here the Ukrainian forces continue their attacks in the direction of Novoprokopivka and Verbove. However, there's been no reported developments in this direction since over a week ago. And this is mainly due to the Ukrainians focusing heavily on gathering their troops rather than conducting offensive operations and assaults towards these positions, but there is still movement and fighting between the two sides, although small in scale. As for the Remevsky Lech area, there's no movements here. There's been no developments since the Ukrainian forces attacked Novomayorsk, and this was further reiterated that the Russian forces have full control over the area, with a video footage of Russian positions in the northern outskirts of the village being shelled by Ukrainian forces. And then we have seen the fighting by Pryotne, where the Russians took the initiative and fought back to the river line. But other than that, there's been no developments, although there is fighting here as well, although small in scale. As for the direction of Bakhmut, we see here that the Ukrainian forces are active on the southern front, where they try to advance further in the direction of Kurdyomivka, as that is their next target, to try and align the front line by the highway that goes to the route south of Bakhmut. And the Russian forces have fortified these positions. And then we have the Russian forces being active in the northern front. They're fighting in the direction of Vasilivka and Vesele. So we see here that the Russian forces are trying to advance in the northern parts and the Ukrainian forces in the southern parts. And the latest reports from Vasilivka is from some Russian sources that the Russian forces have fully captured the village, and from Deep State Map that they basically haven't even entered the village. But Syriac Maps report that they entered it based on video confirmation that they entered the village, which is why I keep saying Syriac Maps is the most reliable source, because regardless of which side it is, he always reports on it accurately, as he is a neutral source. Deep State Map is pro-Ukrainian, so he's less reliable than Syriac, and other sources are pro-Russian, less reliable than Syriac. Syriac is a neutral source, therefore he's the most reliable one. And based on that, we see that it is likely that the fighting continues in Vasilivka. The Russians might have advanced a little bit, but there's no decisive breakthrough on the Russian side. Therefore, the fighting continues, and I've just slightly extended the gray zone. And that is the latest developments from Vasilivka. Based on my experience on reporting on these map changes, there are two things to look out for. For the Ukrainian side, it is the Twitter offensives, and on the Russian side, it's the Telegram offensives. The Twitter offensives are typically where the Ukrainian side starts a rumor that they suddenly broke through, killed 10,000 Russian soldiers, and suddenly captured 10 villages, or made a counterattack, recapturing parts the Russians spent a month to capture, but then it never happened, and then they all forget about it until the next Twitter offensive. On the Telegram side, it is typically the Russians going like, we just captured this, and the Ukrainians are running away. They send their troops to the back line. They are completely demolished, but then we see video of them fighting the next day. Like the Russian side reported that the 47th Mechanized Brigade was refusing to fight and had withdrawn due to heavy losses. And then the next day we see videos of them fighting by the front line. So again, we have to be careful of these Twitter and Telegram offensives, because in the end they turn out to be bogus, exaggerated, or just not true at all. And that is something that I've learned through this year of reporting on the front. This is why I say, although there is a lot of changes, and sometimes I'm called pro-Russian because the Russians are advancing, sometimes I'm called pro-Ukrainian because the Ukrainians are advancing, but in the end I just report things as they happened and how they happen. I don't exaggerate one's victory over the other. The Ukrainians have spent 4 months trying to push through. They haven't managed to do so. The only explanation is that it is not going well. That is clear common sense. A pro-Ukrainian will try to expand and say, well, it's because the Russians simply have so many troops and they are taking extensive losses, but the Ukrainians simply does not have enough firepower to destroy every single Russian soldier because there's just so many of them, so they need more weapons. The Russians will say, well, this is obviously because the Ukrainians are just sending meat into a meat grinder, and then suddenly they have no troops left. But the fighting is ongoing. That means the Ukrainians have troops, and the Ukrainians have not broken through. This means the Russians are holding on firmly. So it is somewhere in the middle, and I'm trying to determine that. And in relation to this, at the start of last month, the 1st of September, I made some analysis and predictions for the month of September. I'm thinking of doing that as well for October, but before we get into that, let's look at a few predictions I made at the start of September and how they were almost completely correct. So what we're most likely to see from the Ukrainian side is that they will decrease their operations around Velika Novoselka and the Remevsky Lech area. So this first prediction is that the Ukrainians would decrease or completely stop their operations by the Remevsky Lech area. I said they would do a slow grind towards the front line, trying to advance a little bit, but there would be no major offensive or breakthrough in this direction. They switched their focus towards Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk, but it was essentially through. There was almost no offensive operations, and even the ones towards Novodonetsk and Novomayorsk were hardly anything to talk about. So this was generally a prediction I would consider accurate. And at that point, there will be few days until the rainy season starts, and that is when they'll launch their offensive. The point being that if they wait until the rainy season starts, they'll have a difficulty in launching their offensive. However, if they launch it prior to the rainy season and they manage to break through and they then focus on consolidating their positions, it is best for them to do so when the rainy season is ongoing. The reason for that is that the Russians will have a difficult time counterattacking and pushing them back across the defensive positions. My second prediction was about the Ukrainian side and where they would focus their forces and how they would do so. So essentially, I say the Ukrainians would launch a main push and that it would happen as close to the rainy season's start as possible. The rainy season hasn't started all through September, and now we're in October, and a week to the front, we have only 1 day of rain. So most likely it isn't starting soon either. But at the point where the Ukrainians will start their main push, we will and must still expect it to be close to the beginning of the rainy season, whenever that is. They are currently building up their troops, similar to what they were doing in the start of September. Throughout September, this is what they achieved. They managed to push to the south of Robotyne and towards Verbova across the main defensive line, a breach, but not a breakthrough. And as such, we are now seeing that they are continuing their build-up, and they haven't advanced in quite a while now. So most likely we are waiting for their main push, which is soon to come. Push back the Ukrainian forces and hold them at the location as long as possible until the rainy season begins and the Ukrainians get bogged down in the mud. In that case, they can then launch their artillery shells and keep attacking the Ukrainian positions, preventing them from actually capturing the bridgehead across the main defensive line. And this final prediction I'll be talking about is from the Russian perspective, what they would be doing. And I said that they would, and I expected them to essentially pull the Ukrainian forces across the main defensive line and then start hitting them once they are across. And this is exactly what we're seeing. The Ukrainians have spent exactly 1 month going from breaching the Russian defensive line to still being there ahead of it, but not even fighting within Verbova yet. So the Russians have clearly drawn them in across the main defensive line and used this area to essentially grind down the Ukrainian forces as much as possible before their main push. And that is what we're still seeing at the end of September and now on the 1st of October. So yes, I did a bunch of speculation at the start of September, but in the end, who was right? Me or those experts claiming Ukraine would have Crimea by the 1st of April. So the current situation is that the Ukrainian forces are essentially stuck by the main line of defense of the Russian forces. They've managed to breach through, but not break through, the main defensive line. And we're seeing them building up a lot of troops in the direction of Kherson and in the direction of Orikhiv. So we're seeing at the same time that the offensive south of Bakhmut in the direction of Klishivka and Andriivka, the Ukrainian forces have successfully captured Klishivka and Andriivka. They're fighting by Kurdyumivka. And as I predicted last September, I'll do it again. I expect the front line to move here by Opitne and down south towards the main line here by the highway. This is because we have these open fields here. As soon as the rainy season begins, the Ukrainian forces will have a hard time pushing through due to the muddy fields, and as such, the Russian forces will be able to hold their positions here. The Ukrainian forces have largely captured the heights here by Klishchiivka, and therefore the Russian forces have to stay by the heights ahead of this highway. Therefore, that is likely the position they will hold. As for the southern front, we'll see that the Ukrainians will continue building up for a week or two more, and then they will launch their main push, and you will not be in doubt when it happens, and it will likely be just before the rainy season begins. And at that point, we'll see them try to break through Russian positions. They may even break through the first line of defense, but it'll unlikely lead to success. They'll unlikely capture Tokmak. They'll unlikely cut through to the Azov Sea, and therefore their offensive will fail. And that is my predictions for October. And I believe at the same time, once their main push has been launched and it has been stopped, the Russians will start their own offensive operations in the northern parts. Here there'll be two scenarios. Either they'll launch a major one that isn't like the biggest, but it'll be bigger than they have done since January, where they'll try to capture the east of Volga River and Liman. There's also the second possibility, which is just small operations similar to the between January and June, where they will start doing some smaller pushes north of Bakhmut, towards Siversk, towards Liman, slowly but surely advancing in these directions, trying to capture them and trying to advance in these areas. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.